Hey, hey, hey. I want to be excited and think that you're all just here for me, but I know you're not. And I'm really excited to bring up our next guest for this incredible panel that I know you've all been waiting for. The man, literally the person who plays the myth, Tom Hiddleston. Hey, hey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? Great? Cool.
I think they're very excited that you're here.
I'm excited to be here, yeah. Thanks so much for this weekend. It's been really fun. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, you've been out here meeting lots of fans and signing lots of autographs.
Yep.
Are you having a blast at Ace Comic Con?
I'm having a blast at Ace Comic Con. Yeah. Have been some very fun photographic ideas that people have presented to me.
Ooh, do tell.
Well, there have been quite a few bears dressed like this, which makes me laugh. What else? I'm suddenly drawing a blank on all the other ones.
We'll come back to it.
Okay.
You'll think about it. You'll be like, you're
There have been
literally
so
going to be
many.
in the middle of an answer, and you'll be like, oh, that one person. So you played in a role in a little franchise called the MCU. I just want to make sure that let's just get it out of the way. Yeah. But for a lot of us nerds out there, and I think for you, the concept of Loki is something that's so long and something that roots back into Norse mythology.
Yeah.
And even in the Marvel universe was really a villain.
Yeah.
But your portrayal of Loki was a very complicated brother, frenemy, son. How did you first approach playing Loki as a role, having all of this source material to work with?
First of all, can everyone hear me okay? Yes, okay. I always have to check that. The longer my engagement with Loki has gone on, the deeper my astonishment that it's me. If I look back at it, it seems so unlikely that I would be playing the Norse god of mischief who has been around in the collective unconscious, certainly in the sort of northern or western, the northern hemisphere and western culture for over 2,000 years. And when I first engaged to play it in Kenneth Branagh's Thor, diligently I went back to the comics, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Walt Simonson, Koipel, and then also went into the canon of the Norse myths, these extraordinary stories of how the ancient Scandinavian people made sense of the world. And there was also a script I was working off, and so I thought, well, there are key points in the script. He's a brother, he's a son, and those relationships needed to be calibrated quite delicately. But the tone of the character himself, who is he, why is he, was so fascinating, because in the old Norse myths, as many of you will know, at the Council of the Gods, Loki was never trusted. He was always somebody who one was never sure what his motivations were. He was mercurial, he was mysterious, he was enigmatic. He was highly intelligent, but could use that intelligence for nefarious means. But in spite of that, he was always deemed necessary. And that when some terrible crisis befell the gods, and Odin and Thor and Frigga and the Council of the Gods, none of them knew what to do. They'd run out of ideas. There was always a knock on the table from the far end. Loki sitting on his own. I've got an idea. And it will be bonkers. But it just might work. And that, I think, is a really interesting thing as an actor to inhabit, is that there is someone, a character, Loki, who has represented chaos. Our lives as human beings are governed by those two forces of order and chaos. We like things to be ordered, but sometimes they're chaotic. And sometimes chaos is what you need. And that's what Loki is. And it's a really exciting thing to step into that as an actor.
And I think that really, yes, please clap. Absolutely. And I think that personifies the evolution of the character as well, because there's these moments in Thor Ragnarok where you're like, all right, Thor's up a creek, there's no paddles, and then in walks in Loki, whether he wants to help or not, at the perfect moment. How has it been being able to evolve from this first iteration in Thor into what is ever more increasingly complex, but also, let's be real, it has taken on a life of its own. It's become one of the most beloved characters in the MCU. It's my niece's favorite. I love her to death for it. But how has that evolution, how has, for you, the character evolved?
Well, I think I've been incredibly lucky in that the depiction of the character, the writing of the character, was, for someone, supernatural, incredibly human. And there is a humanity to him that is very obvious, I think, in Kenneth Branagh's film. His vulnerability, his heartbreak, all that pain, but also then this other factor of his kind of gifts, some of which were taught to him by his mother, that he is a sorcerer. And it actually is in the Dark World, as well as in Ragnarok, is Loki is called upon to help Thor because he's the only one who can, in spite of this ancient rift between them, because of their childhood enmity. So in terms, it's a narrative gift for an actor to have all of that, fantastic, accessible emotion, and this idea that he's the only one with certain sets of keys to the universe, and he's the only person who can open those doors. It's been a ride, and I'm just enormously grateful. I feel so lucky that I got to do this. I really do.
So I gotta ask, because there are people dying to know. This is not the end for Loki. There is going to be a live action series on Disney Plus. How excited are you about this? Because obviously everyone is excited about this.
That's amazing. I think I posted something about this. It is very exciting. I cannot say much about it, I'm afraid.
I tried.
Time will tell.
Well, we'll all be waiting. Okay. But as prolific as Loki has been, you also are a stage actor. You are a actor who has, as many times as your hairstyle has changed, as many roles as you have had.
Yeah.
And there should be a Tumblr dedicated to your hairstyles. But there is a Twitter. Clearly,
there we go.
I didn't even know. How has it been in balancing all of this in such a large role, but also taking on the fact that you are a very accomplished actor? You have a stage. Yes, you can clap. Totally fine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
You know, you've also, and particularly for me, you've played some very meaningful roles for folks. Like you have played Hank Williams.
Yeah. Thank you.
Which cannot be easy, right? Because you were not from the United States. I don't know if you guys know, he's not from the United States.
By the way, I'm not from Asgard either. So.
You mean it's in a real place?
It is, but I'm not from there.
Okay, great, because you're going to break a lot of people's hearts.
Yeah.
But being someone who is from the South, it cannot be hard. I mean, it cannot be easy to go into something that historically is just not what you grew up with. It is the Deep South, particularly in the Hank Williams biopic. It's the Deep South.
Yeah.
And you really personified it, and even you even did your own singing in this movie.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Thanks.
How does one even step into one, getting an Alabama accent,
Yeah.
but two, really preparing yourself for that kind of role, or any kind of role when you're really stepping so far out of yourself?
Well, I always say that what I look for, no matter how far away the character seems to be from me, is points of connection. And so with Loki, for example, I think, well, he's a son. I'm a son. I understand what that is. He's playful. I have a playfulness in me. He's vulnerable. I have my own vulnerability. So you pull from yourself to some extent. And then what you don't have, you supply with imagination that's backed up by research. And that's the same approach to Hank, really, is I tried to find points of connection between me and him. I mean, there is some distance between us. I was born in 1981 in London. He was born in 1923 in Alabama. And we had very different lives. But one thing I connected to is that he was a performer and that he really understood the magic of the connection with a live audience. And he was incredibly, I looked at some of his old performances and he was incredibly charismatic, incredibly spontaneous and playful. And then, of course, there was all the things I didn't know, really, I didn't have access to. And that's, for me, that was the heavy lifting. It was just researching, listening to his voice, finding lost recordings, and the way he spoke is gone now, I think, even in the South.
Yeah.
And some of the crew in Louisiana who were from the South now, they said that I sounded like their grandfather. It was like a sound that had died out. And it's a rhythm thing as well. I mean, he would say, go out on stage and say, this one's bought us quite a few beans and biscuits. It's called. And it was it really had a really strong dialect.
It was almost in his soul, and I kind of can see that, particularly, and I love the fact that it also stars another one of your Marvel co-stars.
Yes, yeah.
And Elizabeth also did her own singing.
She did, yeah. And we have never worked together in the Marvel universe.
Oh, that's right. You have not. You're just, in the same circles.
That's right. Yeah.
You know some of the same people.
Yes.
You're friends from work.
Yeah, friends from work. Yeah. No, it was a lovely challenge, and music is a big inspiration for me. I have such profound respect for musicians, and I thought, wow, to make a film about someone who'd had such an impact on contemporary culture. I mean, really, we were talking a bit, and it struck me that Hank Williams had influenced some of the people who had gone on to change the face of the 20th century. He'd been an influence to Elvis Presley. He'd been an influence to Bob Dylan. He'd been an influence to Bruce Springsteen. I thought, wow, these are big boots. And as I was learning the songs, I started to understand that the vulnerability of a songwriter, a singer-songwriter, is that you're not saying somebody else's lines. These are lines that have come right from within you. So if Hank is singing "I'm so lonesome I could cry," it means he's been there and he's trying to communicate that feeling. And there's a sort of a purity of that openness, I thought, which I had to honor in my interpretation.
And then I love the clap for everything. And then you moved on to basically doing espionage. Espionage.
Yep. Yes.
That is a word. How do you jump from this very heartfelt, very complicated, very talented man with such impact to basically, being a spy?
It's all about what I find so interesting about acting is that you're investigating the masks we wear. We all wear a mask to some extent. We all present an exterior to the world. And some of those masks are very complicated, and they're defenses against exposure. They're defenses somehow. And I think charisma was one of Hank's defenses, actually. And then to go on to Jonathan Pine, it's almost like his uniform, his charm, his politeness is a defense in some way. Hiding behind the uniform of his deference and elegance is a way of hiding. He doesn't somehow want to be seen. But the events of the first episode compel him to do something very different and much more active, come out of hiding, which I would think, is John le Carré's interest in a way in calling the novel The Night Manager. What sort of person becomes a night manager in a way? Sort of, creatures of the night, etc. Interesting.
Yeah. So Night Manager, you should check it out if you haven't already.
Thank you.
And you've got so much more along the way, and I just want to bring this up just to show how diversified you have made your career, because you've made decisions. You've made very strong decisions to take on roles that are complex and tell very human stories, even in the extraordinary.
Yeah.
You're now going to be on stage. You popped on yesterday in our panel with Charlie Cox. And you are going to be on stage doing Betrayal.
Yes. You've actually just hit on something which I think is something that's unconscious in a way. Is that I really enjoy playing complex characters because I think we are all complex. And it makes me think of the Walt Whitman poem where he says, I contain multitudes. I think we all contain many, many different aspects of ourselves. And in playing complex people, it's sort of exploring the complexity that we all share in some way. And Betrayal is no different. It's about a triangle of three very intimate, complex relationships. And it's a masterpiece. It's by Harold Pinter. And in lots of ways, it's about intimacy and the things we do to avoid it, and also the things we do because we crave it and we need it. It's a very deep play. There's a lot going on beneath the surface, and what will be really interesting is excavating that. The things that are not said, the things that are felt inside but are never said. I think there's a tension between the external and the internal. So, and I couldn't be more delighted to be working with Charlie Cox and with Zawe Ashton. It'll be There's two really terrific actors and very courageous, and so I think working on this stuff with them will be fascinating.
And it's interesting the way you like to embody these. And we were talking about this idea about impersonation versus imitation, and how you're able to embody these kind of characters. Is there one particular character or one particular role that you have played? Because I mean, man, you've played Hamlet. Like you've done a lot of heart-wrenching characters. You're doing soul searching in a lot of ways. Is there one in particular you felt like was most challenging, or you felt like pulled you so far, was rewarding because it pulled you so far outside of your comfort zone? Do you have a comfort zone?
Yes, I do. It's a really good question. About the soul searching, I think in a way that's sort of part of my own soul searching, I guess, is that I get to sync up with these extraordinary minds, like Shakespeare's mind, or some of the characters I've played, and you align yourself with them and explore their mind, and it's also a strange parallel. There's a mirror in there somewhere. I'd say the most challenging are the Shakespearean characters, because they're so deep, and there's a reason that he's regarded as the greatest writer who ever lived or wrote in the English language, because the way he externalizes human feeling and human experience into words is without equal. And as an actor, you have to step into the authenticity of what those words are describing. You have to feel it, you have to say it, you have to do it, you have to do it all at the same time. And if you miss it, if you miss your mark, it's really obvious. And so the challenge is to live in these very profound emotions. He writes about life and death, fathers and sons, grief, loss, love, passion, anger. These are the things that make us who we are. And you have to step into those things and commit fully. So that's probably the greatest challenge.
Do you have a favorite Shakespeare play?
It sort of changes. Yeah. Depends on the mood. There is something unique about Hamlet, having played it now, because it really is. The character is. The more you do that play, you realize the character is trying to understand if there is meaning in the experience of being alive, which is about the biggest question you can ask, I think.
It's pretty big.
But then I also love I love the comedies. They're so bright and so light. I haven't done so many comedies, and King Lear is very profound, but I'm too young for King Lear. I like watching it.
Well, I think it's time to get some audience questions.
Sure. Thank you so much. It was so interesting, those questions. Thanks, Angelique.
So you have a line. I already knew you were back there. So if you've been around any point of this weekend, we always want to make sure, since you know Tom's name, so that Tom knows your name. But before we get started, I had a very special request that came in, someone who had to leave, who had an audience question for you. Her name is Mariella. She had to go back to DC, but she wanted to know, if you were a kid and you were at Comic-Con, who would be the person you would be most excited to see?
Now or then?
I don't know. You could pick both,
an answer. I mean, if there were Comic Cons when I was a kid, it would have been Christopher Reeve as Superman. Yeah.
This is a solid answer.
Yes. As far as I'm concerned, he started this whole thing. You know, in terms of, you know, superheroes in the movies. Yeah. I mean, I loved watching those films as a child. So.
Yeah. Agreed. Those were the best Superman movies. At me, I don't care. So we'll take audience questions. What's your name? Where are you from?
Hello. My name is Caitlin. I'm from San Antonio. I flew here on Friday and I missed school, and we were supposed to start learning about Hamlet. So my question is there anything that you could tell me going into Hamlet, like what to expect, or...
It's so funny.
It gets dark very fast.
Right. So am I the substitute teacher? Okay, class, please open your textbooks at page 81. How do you start with Hamlet? So you're doing it at school?
I read Act 1, but I don't know a lot about it.
Okay. So the thing you probably already know is that Hamlet is the Prince of Denmark. You figured that out. Yeah, okay.
I did.
And his father has just died. That's the key thing, I think, that I found it was easy for me to forget, is it's really basically about that, the beginning, is that it's something we can all relate to, which is he just lost his dad, and he is not over it at all. He's just in the depth of grief. And everything else comes as a result of that grief, really. His response to every other event is because he's so grief-stricken. It doesn't help that the ghost of his dad comes to him pretty early on and says that his uncle murdered him in the garden. That's not an easy piece of news to digest. So he's not a happy chappy, shall we say. But he's highly intelligent and witty, and it's in that turmoil, really, that he starts asking, like, what's the point of life? To be or not to be? That is the question. Of course, the answer is profoundly to be. Profoundly. No matter how bad it gets, to be. But he's in that question of worrying about it. He's like, wow, life is really hard.
Adulting is hard.
Adulting is hard, yeah. What can I tell you? I think there's a really interesting thing about retaliation when you get to the end, which is that retaliation gets you nothing. It actually gets you nothing. You think it's going to make you feel better, but it actually makes you feel worse. And if Hamlet could only have got to a place of forgiveness and inner peace, he might have been all right. But he gets so caught up in needing to enact revenge that revenge is a fool's errand. Revenge is worthless. There you go.
She should get extra credit for that.
Let me know how you get on.
Hi, my name is Donna, and I'm originally from Florida. We're all familiar with you on the big screen. We've seen you on television, and now you're going back to the stage. What are the main differences, if any, in how you prepare for those productions, and which style is your favorite and why?
Oh, thanks, Donna. Donna, did you come dressed as Jonathan Pine yesterday?
Yes, I did.
Okay, cool. Great outfit, by the way. I suppose I prepare in much the same way for everything, which is to just try and be as ready to play as possible. The most enjoyable part of acting is acting with other people, with other actors. And playing in the space between you and inventing something alive and new every time. And so before I get to that point, I like to have done all the sort of desk work and the head work and reading and thinking and researching. And so that's what I'm doing at the moment, really. And people often ask about the difference between theatre and film, or film and TV. And I think the main difference for me, which isn't often thought about, is that when you're in the theatre, I'll be doing Betrayal for 12 weeks, and it will never be the same twice. And it shouldn't be, because the audience is different, and they bring a different energy, and the audience is part of the event. So the energy they bring is part of what happens in a way, because we're all molecules in the same building. And on stage, you get to constantly ask a question. Every night, you try and find a new truth about the piece. And on film, you have about 2 hours to find the truth of a scene, and then it's locked forever. And in one way, it's a relief, because if you think you got there, it's immortalized in a way. But if you do a good performance on stage, it's gone by midnight. And then you have to get up in the morning and do it all again, and it will never be the same. And I love that sort of cycle of investigation. I think that's what's really interesting.
Hi, my name is Roxanne, and I'm from California. And my question is that Loki is a very complex character, and he does things that the audience may love, and then he does things that the audience won't love as much. So I wanted to know that at what point in Loki's story arc do you believe that, did you think that maybe the audience could be rooting for this character more than like hating on him?
I think that varies from audience member to audience member. I think, again, it goes back to that first film. He finds out too late that he was adopted and that his real father was his father's mortal sworn enemy. And that is incredibly emotionally destabilizing. And it is a great scene to play. And I think people, for that reason, always understand, like, Loki is a troubled soul, and that he is evacuating all his pain onto other people. But they understand where the pain comes from. So there's sort of, there's an empathy there. But plenty of people stop me in the street and say, Loki's a bad guy, So, he does some terrible things. But I think that first film really humanizes him, and I think makes the rest of the journey interesting, because it makes you always think he could be pulled back, he could be redeemed, and in my opinion, he is redeemed in Infinity War.
All right.
Hi, my name's Laurie from New York, and I'm wondering, after the play Betrayal finishes in London, are you planning to take that anywhere else in the world?
It's too early to tell, I think. We have to get the show on the road, or not on the road, but the show on in London first. And then who knows? I don't know, but thanks for asking.
You'd have an audience.
Hi, my name is Sydney Burns, and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona here. And I want to start off by saying you really inspire me, and you're amazing, and I love that. Thank you for doing that. My emotional support, because socialization. And my question for you is, how has your love of Shakespeare rubbed off on Loki, like in the dialect and his personality?
Well, Kevin Feige will freely admit, the president of Marvel Studios, that the reason he wanted Kenneth Branagh to direct the first one was that he saw Asgard as a kind of, initially, the drama of Asgard is the dynastic drama about kings and princes and fathers and sons. And of course, Shakespeare knew how to write those stories. And Kevin, like everybody else, knew Ken was a extraordinary Shakespearean and would bring a kind of gravitas to this world. And in first discussing those relationships between Odin and Thor and Loki with Sir Anthony Hopkins and Chris Hemsworth and Rene Russo as Frigga, we all talked about these kind of Shakespearean relationships. So I've never thought of it as if I'm doing a dialect or anything, but it was more that perhaps because of taking our lead from Kenneth Branagh and Anthony Hopkins, that there was a classical archetype, a classical silhouette in some way, which was a good place to start. And then actually we've been quite playful with it, I think. And there are moments when that really relaxes and becomes much more contemporary, and that's when it can get quite funny, I think. Especially in more recent films like Ragnarok and Infinity War. So I think the tension in that is quite good. That sometimes, especially with Loki, there's a bit of pomposity, and then it's undercut by a Hulk smash or something like that, or Get Help.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Mr. Hiddleston. First of all, I love you so much. And my name is Deng Jingyi. I'm from Chicago. I don't know if you remember, but I asked a question in Chicago Comic-Con last October too. And today my question is, what if one day you wake up and you see Loki, who is wearing his suit, his hammer, and holding his tiny knife he used to stab his brother? He's standing right in front of you. Like, what would happen? Like, could you imagine what conversation would you have, and are you going to take him to a tour in this universe?
So Loki comes to visit.
I think I'd have to ask myself if I was dreaming, hit myself in the head, shake myself awake. My goodness. I mean, I just sort of say, I'm sorry, first of all. Whoever you are, whatever I did my best, It was based on all these stories that people have written down for 2,000 years. Not, I was just going off what other people said about you. Do you fancy a coffee? Tea?
I mean, what else could you do at that point?
Breakfast? Is it a long trip? Can I make you some eggs? I don't know.
Next question.
Hi, Tom. My name is Christy, and I'm from San Diego. I'm a huge fan of Pinter's work, and I'm sorry to hear that you and Charlie haven't played squash in years, although I do hear it's because you're too good at it.
Oh.
So the beauty of Betrayal is in that so much of the emotional impact comes not from the script itself, but from the actors' interpretations and vulnerability during delivery, as well as their ability to convey that to every seat in the house. My question is, how do you feel that the demands and approach specifically required for this show may differ from your theatrical work in the past?
Really good question. I'm not sure because I haven't done it yet, but I think in approaching it, most recently I've been doing Shakespeare's plays on stage, and the nature of the verse is that the actor has to externalize everything. Everything is on the surface, and so emotions have to be very legible. And I think with Harold Pinter, the emotions are internalized in a very different way, so the echo is deeper, sort of underneath the surface. And I think that will be the primary difference. But I don't know, and I'm looking forward to finding out.
So these are the words that I am sure everyone in line is going to be very upset to hear. This is our last question.
Hello, Tom. I'm Rhea. I'm from Arizona. And first of all, I want to thank you so much for being here. It means so much to so many people. It's really awesome of you. Thank you. My question is, in your audition for Marvel, you originally went for the role of Thor. What was your experience with that? And what was your reaction to your casting?
You know, I so enjoyed the whole process because really at that point I'd never advanced as far in an audition process for a film of this scale. You know, all actors will tell you, like when the beginning of your acting life, it's rejection after rejection after rejection, and it's never personal. It just is par for the course in a way, but it feels personal. But I suddenly knew that I was getting close to something. And Kevin Feige, I'd met him, and he said he'd seen my audition tape, and he'd also seen me do some theatre work in London. I thought, well, there are people here who actually know what I'm capable of, and if I don't get this, it'll be me who's screwed it up. And I just enjoyed it so much. The screen tests were really fun, and I had to try and get in a different shape, which I really enjoyed. And eventually I started, as I was auditioning, because it took about 4 months, this process. And so there was a lot of waiting and not being quite sure if it was going to happen. But the story started to emerge that there were these two brothers, and that both those roles were really interesting. And I had heard they weren't screen testing anyone for Loki, which I thought was really curious, because I didn't know, with all these guys, these names in the hat, you know, people understand who they were now. But there was all these candidates for Thor, but then nobody was cast as Loki, and then suddenly they made, I think, Kevin Feige and Kenneth Branagh, they made the decision on the same day. And they called Chris and they called me. And I was just so excited, because by then I'd read the comics, I understood the story, and I could see what a great character he was. And both Kevin and Ken said, we think this is the right part for you. And I trusted them. And I'm sitting here today, and it's 10 years later.
Well, I want to personally thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Angelique. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
And so if we can get everyone to stand up for me and get all that excitement that you just had, we're going to take a picture.